The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome to the first Robotics Canada Ask the Expert webinar. These are weekly webinars during the build season, and they're targeted to the FRC community, held on Tuesdays at 7. Look for the links in the FRC Canada Team Blast or on First Robotics Canada socials. Everybody's come in on mute, so if you stay muted, I appreciate that because it helps all of our audio. But if you have any questions, we'd like you to just type it in the question box and we're going to answer them during the webinar. And just the schedule for tonight, I am your moderator, Sarah Sills. I'm a first senior mentor with First Robotics, and I'm hopeful tonight to let you get the most out of this event. Tonight, our topic is all about the Chairman's Award, including the new definitions and how to use them properly. And then we'll end with a little sign-off. So here's our first news item. The safety badge program has started up again for this year. I'd like you to know that over 13,000 people have done this since it was begun, and you can be one of them. This year, we already have a few people who have earned the new silver badge, so good on you. And everyone wins when we all know more about safety, so it's a good thing. And there are prizes, just so you know. And there's a shout out tonight to 1360 Orbit Robotics, who has a big team push on to try and get everyone to do it, so good for you. The EVERYBOT, well, by now, most of you are well on your way to having your functional robot, right? But if you still need an idea or, want some inspiration, check out the EVERYBOT. It shows some very usable solutions, and about 10 Canadian teams are using the EVERYBOT, well, as inspiration, might not be precise, including a team in Manitoba. So thanks, Team 118, for sharing this information. First Tech Challenge was a new Ontario program this year. There were 30 teams that competed recently at provincials, but perhaps you or someone you know would like to give it a try next year. So consider taking a jump start. So this gives you a financial incentive and a time incentive to get started early. So you get the product in the spring, so in a few months, to start early, and you get a discount on, next year's season. So check it out on the First website to see if it works for you. And just note that the applications close on March 1st. And again, same kind of concept for First Lego League, but their deadline's even earlier. So, get to work if you want this. February 21st is theirs. So on the slide is a few more of the details, but it's the same, idea. And go to the First website to find out more. Reach out to me, a First senior mentor, or any of the other senior mentors or other First staff if you want more information as well. First Canada is updating their strategic plan. So it guided us well to 2020, but now we want to think ahead to 2025. Where do we want to be? So the link to give your input was sent out in the latest FRC blast. So share it around if you're the one who has it. All viewpoints are welcome. And if you need the link, let me know and I can get it to you. So they're trying to get that information in by this Friday, so February 7th. My last news item is event carpet. So if you are wishing that you had carpet like competition carpet, you can get that because First donates event carpet to interested teams, kind of near the end of the season. So it's great to have if you want to set up a practice field, or if you just want to set up a test area. They will cut it in pieces if there's somebody you want to share it with. First Canada can help organize that. Please note, it is heavy, okay? So you will need a way to get it home after the event and people, I don't know, teammates, mentors, friends, to help you load it and unload it at the other end. So kind of be thoughtful of that. It's really useful though, so it's great that First Canada is sharing that. Okay, that's it for the news. So now I'm going to intro 1114. I'm not sure if they need an introduction, but allow me. It was 2003 when 1114 started their team, the famous SIMBOTICS, located in St. Catharines, Ontario. They've always believed in supporting the first community, especially at home here in Canada, and they've always had strong technical skills, so they keep the bar high to inspire others. They offer online support through their online hub to teams across Canada, and you can find that link on the First Robotics Canada website. But they're not only technically strong, right? Canada is proud to call them our only Hall of Fame team, which they won in 2012 by winning the Chairman's Award at World Championships. That was in St. Louis that year. They have won 7 Chairman Award in their history, and that's without being able to apply for 5 years after they've won. That's a Hall of Fame thing. They have also won, I counted them up today, an amazing 50 blue banners in total in their history. That's pretty cool. So world class for sure. And Karthik Kanagasabapathy was one of the original founders of the team. So he was on the first Canada team, which was not 1114, it was 188 Blizzard. And he was on that team along with Mark Bredner. So you can see the history of first in Canada here. So between 188 and 1114, he has a lot of first credentials. But nowadays, you're more likely to see him as MC at the events. Probably wearing some Raptors gear. No, Blue Jays gear, of course, right? And he's the only person that I know that has an FRC rule made especially for him. No kicking the Alliance wall. Professionally, he worked at Vex for a number of years, so you might have run into him there when you were ordering parts for your robots. You may also have stumbled across him on TED Talks, just another cool thing he does. He'll tell you more about himself, but mostly he's going to tell us about the Chairman's Award, including the new definitions. So thanks for joining us, Karthik.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm excited to give this presentation and kind of talk about what the Chairman's Award is. So,
perfect. I'm going to give you the slides.
Thank you.
You can hear me clicking.
Yeah, and I'm just going to take over. And there we go. All right, so let's get this started. Thank you, Sarah, so much for that introduction. That was really, really nice. So I can kind of just skip through this slide since Sarah has covered it much more eloquently than I would have. So let's just get right into it. It's the Chairman's Award. This is what we're here for tonight. And some of you are watching live. Some of you will be watching this archive on YouTube. So we're going to try and keep the timing of this content evergreen, but we will speak specifically to what's happening this season. So we have a lot to cover, and we're going to do it in a short amount of time. So what is the award for? I mean, that's really what the question is, and I think a lot of people who know what this is about, but I think it's important to restate what the award is for. It honors the team that, I'm just trying to minimize my screen here. Hold on for 1 second. So it honors the team that in the judge's estimation best represents a model for other teams to emulate and which embodies the goals and purposes of FIRST. And one of the things you'll understand when you're going through the Chairman's Award is there's a lot of parsing of what words mean, because the real description of what the award is and the criteria is it's not very verbose. So you have to try to pull out what things actually mean. So right away, we see that the award is for a team who is the best role model for other teams to emulate, which I think we can understand what that means, and which embodies the goals and purposes of FIRST. Well, what are the goals and purposes of FIRST? And I think this is where people go wrong on the award, because you have to look at what FIRST believes their goals and purposes are. And that is stated: to transform our culture by creating a world where science and technology is celebrated and where young people dream of becoming science and technology leaders. So the Chairman's Award, parsing through all of this, is awarded to a team that is a role model for other teams to emulate and is embodying a culture shift in our world towards world where young people are dreaming to become science and technology leaders. This is all very important to capture as we go through the criteria and what it takes to win this award. So the first question is, why should we submit? And that's a common question, and it's a good question to answer, because when you enter the first robotics competition, you enter because you're entering for a lot of reasons, but you know it's the first robotics competition. You're here to build a robot. And the Chairman's Award seems very separate and very secondary to that goal. So why is this important? And so this is actually an important question. All teams should, and most are already fulfilling the mission first. So you're already doing the things that are required of the Chairman's Award. Submitting for the Chairman's Award is just about documenting what you've done. As a first team, by building a robot and practicing gracious professionalism and going out in your community and spreading the word, you're already doing the stuff that's needed to win this award. But now it's about documenting it and presenting it to the judges to showcase why you are the most deserving of the award. Putting together this documentation also is useful in the long term because it captures your team history and it can be used for marketing and sponsorship recruitment. I know so many teams who do a Chairman's Award video every year, and that video is the same video they send to their sponsors to tell them about what their team is actually doing. Also, with the Chairman's Award, it can help diversify your team, providing avenues for students with a variety of skill sets. I find that if you're a team that's just focusing on building the robot, you're only going to be able to recruit students who are already interested in that sort of thing. And when you don't have a diverse skill set within your team, it's harder to build a really good robot because a diverse group provides diverse solutions and diverse ideas. So if you do recruit students and lure them into the program because like, hey, you're really good at writing essays and presenting and selling to judges, why don't you join our team? Those students are going to end up improving your robot because you're going to have more creativity and a wider array of ideas. But why should we submit? Now there's the flip side of it. Why shouldn't we submit? It is a lot of work. The Chairman's Award is not an easy award to win. There's a huge amount that needs to be done to achieve the criteria of the award, and there's even more that needs to be done for documentation. And I talk a lot when I give presentations on robot strategy about golden rules and priority lists. Well, remember, the jack of all trades is the master of none. And sometimes it's more important to just focus on a few things. So there's nothing wrong with not submitting. There's nothing wrong with taking a year off to say, okay, well, I want to focus on different areas of things. So it's important to remember this. You know, if you are one of those teams out there that only has 12 students and you're working in one classroom, maybe now's not the time to submit for the Chairman's Award. But I think this is a question teams should ask themselves every year and go through this process and at least visit the option of the Chairman's Award. All right, so now that we've talked about why should we submit, well, with any award, you want to know, okay, what do I need to do to win? What is on me? Does our team have to figure out? And the Chairman's Award has some big criteria, and we're going to walk through them one at a time. One of the criteria, and I'm not going to say first criteria, second criteria, because I don't think there's necessarily an order of importance. And so I kind of randomize the order here to neutralize that, because I think sometimes people see them in order that they're written in the awards document, and they assume that there's a hierarchy, and there really isn't. Describe the impact of the first program on team participants within the last 5 years. So what is the impact on the program, on the participants? Now notice the wording they use. They use participants as opposed to students. First, the first robotics competition is a partnership between students and mentors and community and teachers. It's not just a program for students. This is not a student robot building competition. It is a competition that's about bringing diverse groups together and having them all work together. So everyone who participates on your team is considered a participant, and the judges want to find out the impact on all of them. So focus on all the areas: mentors, teachers, parents, etc. What is impact? To me, someone has been impacted if there has been a change in them as a result of. So how has FIRST changed people? Talk about things about how FIRST has changed lives, graduation rates, scholarships earned, future workforce success of students, workforce success of mentors, corporate growth, employee development. Has your community changed? Has your school grown because of FIRST? One of the big things for 11-14 when we won, the judges really remarked upon, our school started, when we started FIRST, as around 450, 500 people. It was tiny. The school nearly doubled in enrollment by the time things ended. Part of that was demographic shifts in the area, but part of that was students were signing up to come to Governor Simcoe because it was now known as the technology and as the robotics school in the district. Even though not all these people were joining the team, the reputation of the school had changed and people wanted to come there because it was no longer considered just the rowing school. It was considered the best tech school in the district. And so that's what we're talking about, impact. And that ties into the next criteria. Describe the impact of the FIRST program on your community within the last 5 years. So we spoke specifically about individuals before, but now you're talking about your community. What is your community? It can be defined in a lot of different ways. So you can talk about your local community, that's the neighborhood around your school. You can talk about your national or provincial community, like the impact that your teams had, or, you know, for Americans who are watching this today, the state, or impact overall. Like there's lots of teams who are pushing for federal government support. That's national community. And then there's the international community. Lots of teams are doing huge international outreach, you know, establishing FIRST programs across the globe, spreading the word, and these things all matter. So always start small first. So talk about your school, tie it back to culture change, increased enrollments, then expand to your local community, and then just keep expanding further with halos. You know, and remember, you don't have to hit every community, but it's important to talk about where you have reached. Describe examples of how your team members act as role models, and, you know, provide examples for other FIRST team members to emulate. So this is an area where you need to focus on what you do best. The things that you do best that are helping fulfill the mission of FIRST. You want to talk about what sets yourself apart, because to be a role model is not just a role model for doing impressive things. They're doing impressive things that stand out amongst their peers. And the Chairman's Award is a competition at its core. And you have to represent to the judges why you are doing a better job and why you are more of a role model than the other teams you're competing against. And that's a little bit weird because we're all, you know, humble and FIRST, and, you know, we don't want to brag, but at the same time, you have to talk about what sets you apart. So if you just focus on what everyone's doing, you're going to sound like every other team. And as someone who reads 20 to 30 chairman's essays every year, and that's just from ones that people have sent me, I read more online, you realize that most chairman's essays sound the same, and that's kind of painful. And the way you're going to win this award is if you can stand out to the judges. So you have to have something unique, and you need to talk about what you are the best at in your region, what you're known for. On 11-14, we focused on two things, and I'll tell you what we didn't focus on. We were not the best team at community demos. We were not the best teams at being in parades or local festivals. It just wasn't what our students were really interested in. But what we were really good at was building robots. And we pivoted that into, okay, let's try and teach others how to build robots. And so we focused on FRC community resources like the KitBot on steroids, which was very similar to what 118 is doing with the EVERYBOT, just not as cool, and what they're doing in 2020 is so crazy to compare to what we were doing in 2012. But we made an iPhone app with resources on how to build a robot, and that was what we thought we were the best at. And of course, we focused on team growth because we had a recipe at the time for starting FIRST teams and starting BEX teams, and we thought we were doing that. Well, we knew we were doing that better than anyone else in the area, and that's why we focused on those sorts of things. But it's about focusing on what you're the best at that FIRST wants teams to be doing, and that's how you can show off your role model capabilities. Describe another criteria. Describe the team's methods for spreading the FIRST message in ways that are effective, scalable, sustainable, and creative. Again, set yourself apart. If your creative way to spread the FIRST message is the same as everyone else's creative way, it's not actually creative. And so this is one where you really have to stand out. And it's not just about standing out in how you tell the judges about it, it's standing out in actually what you've done. So it's, creative is important, but there's other words here: effective, scalable, and sustainable. The judges want proof that what you're doing is working, that it can grow, and that it will continue into the future. How can you show this to the judges? Well, you need to provide data. You need to show them numbers that things are working. Most of the judges you're going to come across in FIRST are engineers, and they like data. And even if people who aren't engineers, like, we're in a data-driven society, and you can't just talk in flowery descriptors. You have to show some actual proof. But sustainability is important. I think over the years, there's been a lot of FIRST teams who, in the effort to win the Chairman's Award, have just been talking about all these different initiatives they've done, but then the initiatives don't continue into the future. And that actually can be a step backwards in many ways. So it's important to show why what you're doing is sustainable. So we're talking creative, effective, scalable, sustainable. Things that we did that were creative, we had an exhibit at the Ontario Science Centre. We convinced the Ontario Science Centre to let us display an old 1114 robot along with an interactive game that we created. We've gotten our robots on numerous TV shows. The big one was Degrassi, The Next Generation. Our claim to fame was that our robot was on the last ever episode of Degrassi that Drake actually was on, and Drake was on set the same time that our robot was on, and so that's kind of a cool thing that we did. And we've done other TV shows: Designated Survivor, Make It Pop, LA Confidential, but that was a way to try and get FIRST broadcast to a much larger audience. Demonstrations at CFL games, student created curriculum. These were all things that were creative at the time. They may not necessarily be creative now because, it's 8 years later, and that's the thing. If you want to come up with what's creative, you can't just be looking back at what others have done. You need to come up with your own. And that's difficult, that's a challenge, but that's what it takes to win this award at the highest level. I don't think we need any more examples there. This is a really important one. I think that it's very misunderstood. Describe the strength of your partnership with your sponsors within the last 5 years. Many people, when they think about partnership at FIRST, think about what organizations are doing for our team. But partnership is a bi-directional relationship. So partnership isn't just about what your sponsors do for your team, it's about what you're doing for your sponsors. And right away, you're going to be like, well, wait, what do you mean? What are we doing for our sponsors? Our sponsor just cuts us a check and that's it. And if that's the relationship that you have with your sponsor, that's not one that's going to be resonant with the judges. So they want to know more than just the sponsors donating money or donating time, but what impact are the sponsors making on the participants, and what impact are the participants making on the sponsors? Examples include things like doing demonstrations for your sponsors to help generate business for the sponsors. Our 1114 General Motors used to use our team as a way to train young engineering graduates on project management. So that was a way that was benefiting both the sponsor and the team. Lots of sponsors use the team as a recruiting tool for employers by saying, yeah, come work for us, and you have the opportunity to mentor a local FIRST team. That's really exciting for FIRST alums. So these are different things you can think of, but if you can come up with cool ways that you're helping your sponsors, you can really set yourself apart. There's a few teams I know, they actually they make parts for their sponsors, and their sponsors prototype ideas and test ideas with the team. These are cool things that you can talk about. There's a lot of criteria here, I know, but we're just going through them. This one can be summed up very simply, but it's FIRST growth. Part of the Chairman's Award, and it's explicit in the criteria now, is you are being rewarded for starting other FIRST teams, not just robotics teams, but specifically FIRST teams. So the judges want to hear about your initiatives to start or form other FRC teams. They want to know that you're supporting and starting teams in the other FIRST programs, so FIRST LEGO League Junior, FIRST LEGO League, FIRST Tech Challenge. And it's not just about starting teams, because that's one piece of the puzzle, but how are you assisting and mentoring teams as they progress through the program? And so this is a difficult one, because you might say, well, we don't really have the resources to start teams. Our team's barely running, and we don't necessarily have the resources to mentor teams. And that's okay. You don't necessarily have to do everything that's part of the criteria for this award. But if you are doing this stuff, the judges are going to want to hear about it, and they want to hear documented experiences. But also, sustainability matters. It's not okay just to go and start a bunch of first Lego League teams and not support them at all, and then they all fold after 1 year. So it's about starting teams, but it's also about how you're sustaining them and helping them gain experiences and really acclimate themselves to our wonderful family of programs. So what shouldn't you do? We just talked about a lot of what you're supposed to do. You shouldn't do things just for the sake of winning the award. And I know that's going to be like, well, you just gave us a bunch of criteria, so we're obviously going to try and fulfill the criteria. But like the Chairman's Award, as we talked about at the beginning, should be about stuff that your team's already doing and your team wants to do. A lot of teams feel like they're trying to hit a checklist and just check the box. Okay, we did this, we did this. And as a result, they don't get a lot of fulfilling endeavors and they don't get a lot of sustaining endeavors. So, and we really had a moment on 11-14 where the first few years of submitting for chairmans, we really were trying to be other teams that we had seen in the past. And we were trying to do things like all these community demos that none of our students wanted to do. I remember there's one talk where a couple kids on the teams like, Karthik, we need to plant trees for chairmans. And I was just like, what? They're like, yeah, we need to plant trees to win chairmans. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. They're like, oh, well, we looked through and like the last like 4 winners that we found planted lots of trees. I'm like, do you want to plant trees? They're like, no, not really. I'm like, okay, we're not planting trees. Like, let's do stuff that we want to do and that we're proud of and tell judges our story as opposed to trying to become something that we're not. So much like in life, focus on what you love and what you're good at and don't try and be someone else. There's no single recipe for how to win this award, and what worked for Team X might not work for Team Y. So really focus on who you are as a team, what your students and mentors and sponsors want to work on, and do those things and excel at them, as opposed to just saying, well, oh, last year there was, like a lot of teams that, help puppies. Like if you really love puppies and want to help puppies, then help puppies. But like if you're allergic to dogs, don't go help puppies. It's not going to win you the Chairman's Award. That analogy always goes off track, but I think you might see what I'm saying. This is a team award. Everyone needs to be behind the efforts. If your team doesn't believe in the culture change that FIRST is trying to achieve, you're not going to be able to win this award. You can't change culture if the culture doesn't exist within yourself. And so a lot of what goes on with the Chairman's Award is about establishing a culture within your team that is the culture where you're emulating the successes of other teams. And once you have that culture embodied upon yourself, you can then become the role model that others aspire to be. All right, so we talked about the criteria. And now let's dive into what the submission is. And we've still got about 30 minutes here to plow through this. So your entirety of the submission needs to cover the major criteria, and it's, well, fitting within the limits and the rules. When you're building an FRC robot, you have limits. You're limited this year to 120 inches in perimeter, 12 inches of extension beyond the frame perimeter, 125 pounds, 1 battery, 15 motors via PDP slots. Like, you have defined limits. With the Chairman's Award, you also have defined limits that are just as hard to abide by as the robot limits. And everyone who's built a robot knows that most teams at the end are struggling because their robot is almost too big, or their robot is almost overweight, or you wish you had a battery and a half to get you through a full match. With the Chairman's Award, you are limited to a 10,000 character essay, which is approximately 1,500 words, which is approximately 3 pages, which is not a lot. A 1,500 word essay, I can usually write one of those in 20 minutes. So like, this is very little is what you can do. A 7-minute presentation for the judges, followed by 5 minutes of questions and answers with the judges, and a 3-minute video. So this is what you're limited to. And for our teams who are excelling and who are on the cusp of winning Chairman's Awards, both locally, provincially, and internationally, you are going to have a lot of stuff to talk about with all that criteria we just discussed. And how do you fit it all in? Well, you can't. And it's just like building a robot. With a robot, you can't necessarily do every task in the game, and you have to pick your high priority ones. When it comes to the Chairman's Award, you can't talk about everything that your team has done, especially when you're a 15-year team, a 20-year team. You need to focus on what's high priority. On 1114, we usually like to pick 2 to 3 main topics and just really hammer them home and go in deep on those topics, as opposed to kind of spreading ourselves thin. When you're building robots, one of the things I like to talk about, it's more important, it's better to have a robot that does 3 things at 10 out of 10 instead of 5 things at 6 out of 10. That absolutely applies with the Chairman's Award. I see so many essays these days where people are just trying to talk about every single thing they do, and they're only basically allotting a sentence or 2 per initiative. And unfortunately, that doesn't tell the judges what you're actually doing. It doesn't tell them the depth of the story or any emotion behind it. And because of that, what you've done doesn't get across. So it's really important to focus on a few things. Also, don't needlessly duplicate content. It wastes resources. You only have 10,000 characters and 7 minutes of talk time. You may not want to rehash some teams' presentations. It's almost as if they're just reading out the essay, and that is a waste of resources. Of course, there'll be some things you want to talk about twice because you want to emphasize them with the judges, but be careful that you're not duplicating too much, especially if your submission content is dense. So there's a lot of different ways of how you can break up the submission. Some people and some teams, most teams kind of divide it up by the major criteria that we talked about. Say, okay, well, let's give 1 paragraph here, 1 paragraph for this criteria. But I kind of like to divide it up by style because I think you can do something really cool. So this is just one approach. There's lots of ways to do things, but here, try this one out. I always like the essay being for very factual and data-driven information about team achievements and endeavors. Writing an essay is really hard, and even the best writers have a hard time conveying emotion through text. And so that's why I kind of, and especially, you have high school students writing these essays, I really think it's kind of important to leave the essay to be for more factual and black and white sort of deal. But the emotion side can come out in other areas. I like the presentation for telling the stories behind the numbers that you talked about in the essay. So emphasize the key points that were from the essay where you've kind of said, we did X number of this and we reached 70,000 people at this demonstration, but go in depth here, talking about what's important. And it's much easier to convey emotion via a presentation than it is an essay. And this is where you can start leaking in. Now the video, this is where I think it's the best area to tell the emotional side of the story, because it's very much easier to convey impactful emotion through edited video. First of all, you can use music, you can pull on every single heartstring with great images and great video clips that, with your presentation, you can only show 3 of your students because they're the 3 ones who are going to be in the room. But with a video, you can show the full impact of all your students. And instead of talking about how you had 70,000 people at a demo, you can show a 10-second time lapse of those 70,000 people passing through the demo. And that's like, whoa, and it really brings it out for the judges. The executive summary, which is, those point form questions they ask you about on the submission portal, summarize everything into a digestible format, introduce facts that didn't fit within the rest of the puzzle. But the key word there is puzzle. Your chairman's submission has to fit together like a puzzle. And the better the puzzle pieces fit together, the more cohesive and powerful your submission will be. And you want to make sure that you eliminate gaps so your puzzle pieces are fitting very nicely. So, you want your different sections to complement each other, support each other, and interlock the way puzzle pieces do.
Did you want to say something about the question period?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. With the question period, and this one's really important. It gives you a chance. So, you've had the judges will read your essay, and to be completely honest, this is where most of the decisions on the Chairman's Award get made. It is by the essay. The presentation is your last chance to impress the judges. But The last part of the presentation is the question period. And this is your chance to reinforce and clarify key points while also introducing some new information that will be the last thing the judges hear, which is a nice extra touch. But also with the question period, it's your chance to get a read on the judges. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but by looking at the questions that the judges are asking you, you're going to figure out what they're most interested in. And you can do two things. You can really hammer home on what they're most interested in, or if you think they're interested in something and they're not interested in something that you really think is the key to your submission, you can introduce that into the answer period. So that's a nice way to tie things in. Thanks, Sarah. Here's, when it comes to the submission, a very common question that we get is, should we have a theme? Themes are a nice way to make the puzzle piece look more complete. They provide a sense of unity and a point of differentiation from other teams. When I talk about a theme, it's like some people, one year we never really themed our essay too much, but our presentation was themed around a museum tour, like as if the judges were showing up at SIMBOTICS Museum and each section of the presentation was a exhibit at the museum and they were being led through that. And it was neat because it does find it's a neat way of linking everything together that, you know, you might be talking about some very disparate areas and a theme ties it all together. One thing that's really important is if you want your theme to be a differentiation from other teams, you cannot plagiarize other teams. And I see this happen way too often at first, that teams just look through and they go back 10 years like, oh, well, this team used this theme at this point. Let's just reuse their theme. And that's just kind of not cool and really not what we're going for. And I'll talk more about plagiarism in other areas. Also, don't force a bad fit. Your theme should fit within your team's branding and identity. So it's really important that your theme doesn't seem out of place for your team. And so that's why, one of the reasons why it's important to have a strong team brand, because then there's lots of neat theming you can do with it. Being topical is good. In 2010 was the year of the Vancouver Olympics. So 11-14, we themed our presentation using the Olympics as the theme, which was, you know, it tied in with the judges. And that year we had a student who ran in the Olympic torch relay. So it all kind of tied in together. So it's, you know, it's an Olympic year in 2020. You could talk about, there's lots of hot button issues that are really in the news a lot that you could possibly tie into. So being topical is good. Okay, what is the essay? I'm going to read directly from the submission. Judges encourage creativity of expression, but the essay must clearly deliver information and facts describing what a team is all about. The essay should draw attention to the strengths of the team. The essay, along with the other information, will serve as the basis for the judges to make a decision on which teams earn the chairman's award. The essay is the most important part of your submission. I can't overstate this. A lot of teams think it's the presentation, and there's a lot of focus on the presentation, but your essay is what's going to separate the thick from the thin. And so it's really, really important to stand out with your essay. Start early. If you're watching this presentation now, today, live, and you haven't started your essay, oh boy, you need to start right away. But realistically, you need time to edit, review, and rewrite. Doing a chairman's essay is like building a robot. I can say that about so many different things. And maybe I should just say that life is like building an FRC robot. And maybe that's why Dean and Woody came up with this program all those years ago. But there's so many lessons to be learned from that. But when you're building your robot, the best teams in the world build something, test it out, and then make it better and make it better and just keep iterating. The key to effective writing is rewriting. And this is one of the quotes that I live by. And the best writing is never just you write something and you're done with it. No writers do that. Behind every great writer is about 1,000 sentences that they typed and then deleted and threw out because it wasn't good enough. And so you need to go through version after version after version, and you can't possibly do that in one night, because sometimes you need to write something and get away from it for 24 hours and then take a look at it again. Get your essay proofread by multiple people. And there's two different types of people who should be proofing your chairman's essay. One is people, people are always like, oh, I got our English teacher to read the essay. And that's really important because your English teacher knows more about writing essays than probably anyone else you know. That's why they're an English teacher. So they're great for proofreading and getting grammar down, those sorts of things. But it's also important to get people who understand first to read the essay and understand what the judges are looking for. And they aren't necessarily going through and making sure that your comma splices aren't excessive and that you're using proper Oxford commas and the such, but they're looking big picture. And are you telling an effective story? Is this impactful? Is it going to resonate with the judges? And so that's why it's important to have different sets of proofreaders. It's important within the essay to use numbers and statistics to illustrate impact. Raw numbers without context are weak. So this is one of the things that people don't get with statistics. And one of the things that I remember someone once told me, and I don't remember where I heard this, but it really makes sense. If you have a statistic and you can add a 0 to the end of it, and it doesn't change how people process it, that means you haven't given any context. For example, I could say that, I'm just making stuff up right now, but like households in Canada use 10 billion gallons of water every year. Or I could say households in Canada use 100 billion gallons of water every year. Those two, it makes no difference to me because I have no idea what a billion gallons of water is. But if you can compare, it's why you'll see a lot of authors use analogies which seem ridiculous, like, oh, that's enough water to fill 50,000 swimming pools. That's because that puts it in context for people because they can visualize what a swimming pool is. And so now that 10 billion gallons isn't just a random number. It's like, oh, I understand this. And the whole thing of like, yeah, that weighs as much as like 37 elephants. Well, it's like, I know what an elephant looks like. So content, context. Consider the example, 68% of our students went on to study engineering versus 68% of our students went on to study engineering, which is an increase of 35% over our team inception, and it is 43% higher than the national average. One of those statistics tells you something, the other tells you things that are a lot more important. So effective statistics take time. You need to do research on your own team, and you need to do some research on society to put things in context. This is really important when you're talking about things like graduation rates and the rates of people going into STEM, because almost every team puts this in their essay, but they don't contextualize it. And it's important to contextualize it for your local community, because I see a lot of teams do things like, oh, well, 91% of our students go on to study in post-secondary education. But if you dig a bit deeper, it turns out that 96% of their students at their school go on to post-secondary. So actually their team is doing worse than the rest of the school. And some could argue that the team maybe is holding kids back. And see, like, that's why it's important to contextualize. But if you're a team that says, oh, 77% of our students go on to post-secondary education, that might sound low compared to the 91%, unless you tell them, the judges, but only 33% of students from our school go on. And that's providing context within your own community. And that shows some real impact. So raw numbers can do yourself a disservice. Make sure all your numbers are verifiable. And we're going to talk about this a little bit in a second once we get to documentation, but you need to be able to prove all your numbers to the judges. Documentation is strongly encouraged by the documentation form. For teams who are trying to win the chairman's award at the higher levels, the judges will absolutely check on your numbers. And now that the documentation form is being required, this is being done so they can check on your numbers. So they will be scrutinized, and I'll say this plainly, do not exaggerate, do not lie, and do not plagiarize. The exaggeration in chairman's submissions has become an epidemic, and that's why the documentation form is now being required, because so many teams were being dishonest blatantly. And they didn't think they'd get called on it, but they are being now. And it's unfortunate because you're going to have to do a lot more work with the documentation form. It's a considerable amount of work to be done. And if you want to blame someone, you should go find the teams who've been lying over the years, because this is it. Unfortunately, our culture of just trusting everything on the honor system had to be looked into a little bit here to try and cut this back. So this is hard, but it's important. In terms of not plagiarizing, there's a lot of great chairman's essays out there, and you could probably get away with finding a chairman's essay that won at Worlds from Arizona in 2008 and taking some of that for yourself. But it's wrong. Please don't do it. Remember, I hate to call upon gracious professionalism because people should just be doing the right thing, but just do the right thing, because when you lie and when you cheat, the only thing you're doing is harming others. And at the end of the day, it's going to be hard to feel good about your victory if you have a nagging feeling that, oh, we only won because we took stuff from other people's submissions and we fudged our numbers. So please don't do it. Be good people. All right, the definitions. These were created in 2016 by the chief judges and the Hall of Fame teams. And they're to ensure that teams use the same language to describe common chairman's terms. Things like started, mentored, and assisted, ran, hosted, or assisted events. If you're ever using these words in your essay, you must be using the exact defined terms. I don't want to read through every single definition here, but understand that each of these words has specific criteria and you need to make sure you're following them. So one of the biggest ones is the difference between mentoring a team and assisting a team. Mentoring a team is an ongoing relationship with the team. So it's not just simply like a team emails you and asks you a question and you answer it. That would be considered assisting, just helping out teams, which we all naturally do. But mentoring is a deeper relationship where there's consistent communication, not just them reaching out to you, but you reaching out to them, visiting their shop or Skyping with them or those sorts of things. So that's, it's very detailed. Starting a team has crazy tough criteria to hit. Because before, people would say things like, I'm not even kidding. One team came to me and said, yeah, we mentored 500 teams this year. I was like, what? 500 teams? And they were just kind of fudging terms because they had like a presentation that had been viewed by 500 people on YouTube or something. And so they assumed that each of those people represented a team, and they assumed that each instance was mentorship. And like, that's crazy exaggeration. That's why these definitions exist, so you don't trap yourselves and say things that are a little bit more than you should have. For every team started, every team mentored, every event ran, every event hosted, the judges are going to want to see documentation by the documentation form. A new one is reached. A team has reached someone if someone has interacted or observed the team in some capacity, whether it be digitally or in person, regarding the reaching team's programs. This is talking about when you're at a demo and, you could be at a demo and like there's 2 million people who come through this area. Did you reach 2 million people? Probably not. You're going to want to talk about the ones that have specifically interacted or observed your team's exhibit. And so that's where you're going to get these numbers. So it's important to not fudge it. You can't just simply say, oh, well, there were 2 million people that came to this thing, but we were in a small area and only 500 people walked past our robot. You actually reached 500 people, not 2 million. How are you going to get this information? We'll talk about that in a second, but it's important that you use these terms in your essay and your presentation and you use them accurately. All right, so the documentation form. Teams are encouraged to provide documentations of all instances of these sorts of things. Documentation should verify the claims made in the essay and presentation. Examples of documentation: letters from teams that you've started or mentored, or events that you've helped run. Download statistics or view counts of resources that you've published. Social media impressions of these things. Attendance statistics on public events. This is hard to figure out. Sometimes it's a huge challenge. I remember when we did the Degrassi stuff, it took weeks in the summer to try and figure out how many people watched those episodes of Degrassi. We had to talk to multiple TV producers and agents. It was crazy. But these are footnotes. It's kind of like when you're doing a research paper in high school, you need to have footnotes in a bibliography to back up your claims. And with the chairman's submission, now you have to do the same sort of thing. So for the first year, this is going to be hard because there's a lot of, you have to go back like 5 years and collect this stuff. But for teams who are doing ongoing initiatives, every time you do something, get a letter, get pictures, get the stats right then and there, so you're not having to look for this stuff going forward. For the mentors or the students who are really eager, I liken this to doing your taxes. Doing your taxes is a million times easier when you gather all the information right away. You staple your receipts, you photocopy them, you sign them, you date them, you have all that good stuff. So in March, when you start doing your taxes, you pull all that stuff out and it's right there for you. If you're trying to do your taxes in March and you're looking for stuff from 12 months ago, 14 months ago, it's a challenge, and we've all been there and it's miserable. So don't make the chairman's award like your taxes, is my statement. All right, we are running down on time here, so I'm going to try and go a little bit faster here. But what's the presentation about? It should complement the essay, but it should not duplicate the essay. Who should present for your team? I think it's important that you're present. This is just a common question I get, and it's important. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be the people who write the essay. I think the two students who should present need to be outgoing, enthusiastic, well-spoken, calm under pressure, and quick thinking. It takes a very special student to be a great chairman's presenter, and it is not easy. But so you really want to identify these people early on in the process. People often ask, how should the presenters look? That is a weird question because I just say good. I think when they usually ask that question, they mean, should they be professionals? Should they be in suits or in like, like a business outfit, or should it be tied in with the theme? I really think that this is a question for your individual team and what the students are comfortable in. A lot of students, especially teenage boys, are super uncomfortable when you put them in dress pants and a dress shirt, and they become self-conscious and they're fidgety. And if you have students like that, well, maybe it's not a good idea to dress them super formal. Maybe just a team shirt with like black pants might be a better fit. There are other people who really get in the zone when they're dressed up, when they're in like a nice dress or a nice suit, and they feel more confident, and so then sure. I really think you need to be professional, so I don't like it when people are in distracting costumes like capes or wigs and those sorts of things. We're not in first LEGO League anymore, but again, maybe if you have presenters who are in the 7th grade or the 8th grade, maybe you want to do more of a first LEGO League style presentation, and that it's what works for your team and what really fits. But I don't necessarily think it's the best look, but it's what you want to do. Should you have visual aids? Yes. It's another way to get information across to the judges. It's great for cueing the presenters, giving them something to look off of, and something to point and focus at. Some teams do it electronically via a projector, but that can be complicated to set up. Your setup time counts towards your 7 minutes. So I preferred presentation boards as the big board, which were quick to set up, no technology risk. Some examples, we would bring in these 4-foot by 4-foot giant boards. The judges could read the stuff, but we'd also give them a handout so they could read it all afterwards. They didn't have to like take notes off the board, and the presenters could look at the board to remember what they were supposed to say, which was really important because I don't believe the chairman's presenter should ever memorize their presentation content, which I think I talked about earlier, or maybe I'll talk about it right now. Why I don't think you should memorize your presentation content is when you memorize things, it sounds like you're reading from a script. When you're reading from a script, you don't sound natural and it's hard to get emotion across. I give lots of big public talks all the time, and people seem kind of scared when they see me because I don't necessarily have cue cards, or if I do have cue cards, there's just some point form notes on there. But I'd rather have point form notes to remind me what I'm supposed to talk about than I naturally put it into my own words. And this doesn't mean I haven't rehearsed. I've rehearsed plenty of times, but it just means that no two presentations are going to be exactly the same because I want this thing to sound natural and I want emotions and passion to come across. The question period is really important, and I could talk for like an hour on this sort of stuff, and I do this as a consultant actually, but it's really important that when you're answering the questions to give the judges an answer that's puts the judges in a specific place where you want them to be. It's like playing tennis. When you're playing tennis, if someone hits the ball to you, you can just try and get the ball over the net, which is kind of like just answering a question and saying something. But if you really want to answer, it's like in tennis, hitting the ball over the net to get it into play, like, in between the lines. But the best answers are when you answer a specific question, then add something to the question that emphasizes one of your main points and leads the judges to a certain area, which is what tennis players do when they hit to a certain spot on the court, which will lead their opponent to that spot, which will force their opponent to hit them the ball somewhere where they know they're already going to be. And it's that level of answer that really allows you to excel. To do well in the question period, you must practice, practice, practice. You have to have a lot of people who ask you questions, and you have to try answering all of them in different ways. I talked about fully scripted and versus kind of, going through with point form notes. I just think it's really, really important. But beware of monotony. And monotony often comes from having a fully memorized presentation. You fall into the same old beats and you sound like a robot. And I know it's a robotics competition, but we don't want you sounding like a robot. So you need to vary your intonation. You want to have BAM points where you say it with emphasis. And you can't say every single thing with emphasis, the clapping emoji, but you can pick a few things in your presentation that are really important to you and really bam them out. And that way, those things will specifically get across and stand out in the judges' minds. Make eye contact with all the judges in the room. Remember, you're in a small room with just a couple of people, but you have to look interested in them, and you want to make sure that they are interested in you. Also, look at your other presenters when they're talking. It's going to be hard because it's going to be boring because you probably heard this presentation 100 times before you go into that room. So you're probably not that interested, but you have to look interested, because if you don't look interested in what your presenter is saying, the judges aren't going to be interested. The video, so it's important to understand that the video, while being mandatory, is not an officially judged part of the component. However, the higher levels, the judges will be watching your video, and it's impossible for a well-told video to not impact the judges. So this is where you can tell a real emotional story. However, it's hard. Making a video is not an easy task. Our Chairman's Award video in 2012 that we made, it was a 3-minute video, but we spent nearly as much time on that video as we did on the robot. That might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but it was crazy how much time was spent on it. How do you come up with a good video? Use the media for inspiration. Think about movie trailers and commercials, or just little YouTube videos that have inspired you or made you go, whoa, I need to share this with all my friends. Videos like that can be inspiration for your chairman's video, because you want your chairman's video to have that same effect. You want the audience to watch your video and go, wow, that team is cool. And you want them to feel emotions. I think one of the things that we were most proud of on 11/14 was when our chairman's video played a championship in 2012 after we won, the sheer number of people who started crying. And that told us, yeah, we did make an emotional impact. We really got people to be like, whoa. And to this day, our chairman's presenter who was in that video, and she actually cried during the video. People come up to her when they see her, like, oh my God, you're the crying girl from 11/14's chairman's video. It's been 8 years, but people still remember. And that's called telling a real story. So you want something that gives you all the feels. Music enhances the story, so playing a good song in the background is really important. However, there are copyright restrictions, so beware of that. Here are some examples. This presentation is already available online, so you can take a look through and find some of these videos. I don't think we need to talk too much about the executive summary. It's just those questions that are asked in the submission portal. You can go point form here. It's acceptable. You don't necessarily have to turn this into fully formed answers, which is good because it's only 500 characters. So going point form saves you probably 100 characters. So you can get some extra information in there. And it's a really nice spot to fit in facts that felt out of place in the essay or presentation. So, and usually it's the thing that you do last. So it's a place where you can jam some stuff in. Some extras, other things you can do. Definitely it's important to create buzz about your team via social media. If the judges are going to be looking stuff on your team, the first thing they're probably going to find is your social media accounts. So maybe you want to talk about the cool things you're doing on your social media. It's always nice to give handouts to the judges, a booklet of your submission content. Back in the day, teams, we all thought it was, all the top teams were giving judges supporting material that verified our numbers, and we thought we were unique in that time. Well, it's not unique anymore because now it's mandatory because you have to do the documentation for them. But those virtual footnotes, that's something that Miss Daisy did back in the day. It was called Daisy by the Numbers, and we emulated that on 11/14. It was a big deal for us. Letters of support, hey, guess what? That's mandatory now. And visuals. Handouts are really cool. Spread the word of your program. One really, and I can't believe I stuffed this on line 28. The chairman's judging is based on your essay, your presentation, the questions in that room. The chairman's award is not determined by the judging that happens in the pits. Now, that's not to say that that stuff can't influence it, but the judges usually make the decision without even walking through the pits. The chairman's judges will be locked in the chairman's room and will make their decisions based on the essay that they've read and the presentation that they just watched. So, it's like a lot of teams are like, oh, we have to leave our chairman's presenters in the pit for the whole weekend and they can never leave. It's like, you don't actually need to do that. Final thoughts. We're here at the end. Hooray. Chairman's award process should be fun. If it starts to feel like a chore, you need to reevaluate why you're submitting. Now, not everything in life is easy. And I'm not saying that, if at any point things are hard, you should quit. That's not what I'm saying. Like, you need to see things through, and anything that's worthwhile will be hard at some point. However, if your team finds the whole process draining, or your team starts splitting, where like half the team's like, oh, I hate the chairman's award. The chairman's award's so stupid, it's a waste of time. You may need to reevaluate some things because your team culture is important and you don't want the chairman's award to become divisive. Always remember what the award is to recognize, and that your goal is not to win the award, your goal is to change culture. But if you're making real strides towards culture change and you document it well, you will win the chairman's award in due time. And that's all I have for you. List of some resources. Our old submission is available online. Our old videos are available on YouTube. If you have questions for us, you can add us on Twitter and someone will get back to you really shortly. You can message us on Facebook. They'll get back to you, probably not as fast as Twitter. Instagram DMs is a little bit slow as well. Or you can reach out to me directly, karthik@simbotics.org, or you hit me up on Twitter or Facebook. I'll get to you there. But I took a little bit longer than I thought I would, Sarah, so I'm sorry for that, but I'm happy to take any questions if people still are willing to stick around for a couple minutes.
I am. So good. It was very good. I'm looking for questions now, so if you would like to put anything in questions while we change our slide sharing, go ahead and put that in. So I'm just going to get my screen ready.
And if there aren't questions, that's okay too. I know it's, I just kind of talked for an hour, so there's probably a lot to digest.
Okay. No questions have come up, but I love that you gave your information. So, they might be wanting to reach out privately. I get that. Just a couple of things before I say my nice thank yous. We have a new thing coming, a mobile alumni crew. So if you are a first alumni and you're wanting to mentor the mentors, which I think is really cool, reach out to John Hobbins, and he can, you can say what area you're interested in supporting, and we'll match you up with teams to head out. And there is some support from FIRST to help with that, and so that's really cool. And, as always, I like to mention, you could always volunteer at an event. So, if you're a student, you need those volunteer hours. And, adults, we do it just because it's fun and it's neat to connect with the first world, I guess. So I'm going to just say a special thank you. That was really awesome, Karthik. I thought you made a lot of really good points. I thought there were some pro tips in there. The chairman's video that you work so hard on, use it to connect with your sponsors. I like that. I loved thinking about using following your passion rather than creating a checklist, because I think that's what will come through to the judges. If you feel passionate about it and you haven't just ticked all the boxes, that's cool. So anyways, I thought you gave some really good tips. So thank you for taking the time to share that with the FIRST community. We'll be back next week on different themes. So we have a FIRST alumni, Karen Lee, is going to talk to us about social media tips. And 1305 is going to talk to us about drive team roles and tips. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to my email. That's great. The webinars all go up on YouTube on the First Robotics Canada channel, and there's a playlist for the Ask the Expert, so you can watch them there. And that's all I have for tonight. So we're going to sign off and say thank you and good night.